Money can't buy happiness. I've heard it my whole life. You've heard it your whole life, but do you believe it? That's what we're going to be talking about on this episode of the Driving with Rob podcast. Money can't buy happiness. I've heard it my whole life. You've heard it your whole life. So if money can't buy you happiness, why are you working so hard to get it? Is this just some throwaway cliche that we've heard our whole lives and we've never actually believed it? Money can't buy you happiness. Is that just something poor people tell each other to try to make us feel better? The Beatles had a song called Money Can't Buy Me Love. I don't care too much for money. Money can't buy me love. And now you got that song stuck in your head. And you're welcome, by the way. But even that, money can't buy me love. Is that even true? Have you ever heard of Anna Nicole Smith? You ever see these old, just dried up, shrunken head looking 80-year-old millionaires that are married to a 20-something-year-old blonde bombshell? Maybe money can buy you love. But when people say money can't buy you happiness, yeah, it can't buy you happiness, but it can buy you a cup of coffee. And some people believe that's pretty much the same thing. Money can't buy you happiness, but it can buy you a boat and a jet ski. There was this study that a group of psychologists did to find out if money really could make you happy. And what they found out was that in general, overall, people with a lot of money were happier than people with very little money. Well, duh. Why can't I get a grant from the government or some university to study things like this? I mean, you pretty much make your conclusion before you even start, right? Can money buy happiness? Well, another thing that they concluded from this study was that it really depended on what it took to make you happy. And what they said was, people with a lot of money quite often derive their happiness from accomplishments. So when they made a big business deal or they made a lot of money on a business deal, it made them happy. But it was really the accomplishment that made them happy, and not necessarily the money itself. And that people with very little money, or people who made a very meager income, when they were asked what things made them happy, it was things like love and family, spending time with friends, that kind of thing. So it really came down to what does it take to make you happy, and it's really kind of relative. Happiness is kind of what you make it. You find happiness where you find it. You can't really depend on things to make you happy. And that's evidenced by all of these outrageously wealthy people, entertainers, rock stars who end up committing suicide. They've got all the money in the world, but they're still not happy. They're so unhappy that they end up ending their own life. Obviously, the money didn't make them happy. I don't think it's the money itself that makes you happy. Because if it's the money itself that makes you happy, well, that's greed. And we all know that greed is one of the 7 deadly sins, right? And I should probably do a podcast on the 7 deadly sins. But anyway, it's not the money that makes you happy. It's the things that you can do when you have money that you can't do when you don't have money. And the people who insist on clinging to that old cliche that money can't buy you happiness, number one, they probably don't have any money. That's the kind of people that say that kind of thing. But these same people will still go out and buy lottery tickets. If money can't make you happy, why are you buying lottery tickets? And I think everybody pretty much fantasizes about what they would do if they ever hit the lottery, if they ever won the lottery. And when you're thinking about, can money make you happy? All of my friends and family, at one time or another, have sat around fantasizing about what you would do if you won the lottery. What would you do if you suddenly had all the money to do everything you've always wanted to do? What would you do first? If you could buy anything you wanted, what would you buy first? And I think age, and not so much age, but maturity, has a lot to do with it too. What it takes to make me happy now were not the same things that it would have taken to make me happy when I was in my 20s. You hear about these professional athletes who get these multi-million-dollar contracts when they're 22, 24, 26 years old, and they go out and do really stupid things and end up getting themselves killed, or they end up addicted to drugs or alcohol, end up getting arrested by the police for one form or another of just bad behavior. And it's really not hard to figure out why this happens to professional athletes as often as it does. Because I think about the time when I was in my 20s, especially my early 20s. When you're in your 20s, your future is, what are you going to do tonight? What are you going to do tomorrow? But beyond that, you really don't think about it much because you've got your whole life ahead of you. When I was in my 20s, what would I do if I had all that money all of a sudden just dropped, millions and millions of dollars just dropped on me when I'm in my 20s? Well, when I was in my 20s, fast women and pretty cars were the only things on my mind. Or fast cars and pretty girls. Didn't really care about much else. Because back in those days, I had energy and ambition and things I wanted to do, things I'd like to do, things I'd like to have. What you see a lot of these really young people do when they suddenly come into a giant fortune, they'll go out and buy a $10 million house or a $20 million house because they have the money now. But at this stage in my life, I realized that if I had a $10 million house, I'm going to be paying taxes on a $10 million house for as long as I own the house. And if you have an estate like that, there's a certain amount of money it's going to take to keep that thing up for an indeterminate amount of time. You're going to have to hire servants and groundskeepers and have astronomical bills for heating and cooling. See, a 20-year-old never thinks about stuff like that. And that's why you hear about a lot of these professional athletes and stuff who will buy a $10 million house when they're in their 20s. By the time they're 32, they sell it. Because that kind of lifestyle is not sustainable unless the money is also sustainable. But that money made them happy right then. That made them happy that day because they were able to buy stuff. They were able to buy stuff that the rest of us can only dream about. So when I think about what would it take to make me happy if I had unlimited funds, at this stage of my life, what it would take to make me happy is a quiet little cabin up in the mountains, away from the cities and the traffic and the noise, and to be able to live in peace and a peaceful existence that would be sustainable to the point that I would never have to worry about how I was going to keep up a $10 million mansion. See, when you get older, you're not into the nightlife and the parties and having 20 friends spend the night. I would rather have just a few friends at a mountain retreat. Can money buy happiness? Well, the often misquoted scripture in the Bible says money is the root of all evil. That's the misquote. What it actually says is it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. The money itself is not evil. It's the love of it that's evil. And if you go back to the original Greek translation, what it actually says is that there are a lot of sins, all kinds of different sins, that come as the result of having a love for money. And again, like I said before, that's greed. So it's not the money itself that makes you happy. It's what you do with it. You can Google right now how winning the lottery ruined my life. And you'll come up with millions of hits where you can go look at videos and read blogs and read news stories about how winning the lottery was the worst thing that could have possibly happened to some of these people because they thought the money would make them happy. And it actually ended up making them miserable because they didn't know what to do with it. There was a story of this one guy that won the lottery, one of the major big payout lotteries, like hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, he named his brother as beneficiary in his life insurance policy. Well, his brother hired a hitman to bump him off and make it look like an accident. Well, it didn't happen because the brother got caught. But this guy lost his brother. He lost his best friend because he won the lottery. You hear stories about families breaking up because they suddenly had millions and millions of dollars and greed kicked in, and everybody wanted their piece of the pie. Married couples got divorced. But I did read one story of how the lottery was the best thing that ever happened to me. This guy wins the lottery, and they're watching the results on TV, and when their numbers hit, and they confirm that those numbers hit, all the kids are jumping around screaming, "We're rich, we're rich." And the dad said, "No, I'm rich. We didn't win the lottery. Daddy won the lottery." The guy's dream was always to raise horses. So he bought a horse stable or a ranch where he could raise horses. And he put the kids on the payroll. He didn't give them the money. They had to work for it. And when all of these long-lost relatives started coming out of the woodwork, he said, "I'll pay you an outrageous salary to come to work for me, but I'm not going to just give it to you." Read about another guy who hit the lottery, and he just gave his family members this huge chunk of money each and said, "This is it. This is the last money I'm ever going to give you. I'm going to share it with you, but don't come back to me later for more because this is it. This is all there's ever going to be." So these two guys were able to let the money buy the things that made them happy. So money can't buy you happiness, but it sure can make misery a lot easier to tolerate. And that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. I appreciate you listening. Thanks for downloading. Click on like, click on share. Leave me a comment, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye now.